Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. Back in the early 2010s, I was working for a European-based financial firm. The US offices were managed by Europeans, with a regional head office in New York. Younger employees were generally underpaid and overworked, as the promised reward in your first few years out of college was being promoted to a director position where the salary, perks, and bonus structure would really kick in. It was kind of like how law firms promote their younger lawyers to partners after a long wait. As junior associates, the only good news was that we received the same 5 weeks of vacation per year, plus a few weeks of sick leave, as our European counterparts. For me, this meant a lot of camping and staycations during the summer since I didn't really make enough to travel to exotic or expensive locations. The offices were set up in a way where the business development (BD) directors each had a junior associate. The BD guys would generally network, schmooze, and travel around their territories to meet clients and new prospects. Once back in the office, they would dump their meeting notes on the desks of their junior associates to follow up and land the business, a Hunter-Skinner model, as we called it. As a junior associate, I was pretty busy assisting a BD, so I routinely rolled over at least 2 weeks of vacation every year. I had worked at the firm for 3 years and was starting to get antsy for a promotion. Right after Thanksgiving, my boss in the West Coast office, Mark, called me into his office. "Alex," he said, "I've got some news for you. You're being transferred and promoted to the Southeast office come the new year." I tried to hide my lack of enthusiasm. "That's great, Mark. Thanks for the opportunity. I really had no interest in working or living in the Southeast, but I wanted to advance my career." I rolled over my usual 2 weeks of vacation into the next year, so I was eligible for 7 weeks of vacation in the coming year. After celebrating New Year's with my family in California, I packed up my car and drove across the country. Once in the new office, I settled in and met my new boss, Richard. He promptly called me into his office on my first day. "Alex, good to have you here," Richard began, his tone not matching his words. "There's something we need to discuss about your position." I felt a knot forming in my stomach. "What's that, Richard?" "Well, you see, we're not actually promoting you to director, though you'll be given the responsibilities of the role," he explained, barely making eye contact. "I judge you to be too young, but if you demonstrate that you can do the job, you'll be promoted next year." I was pissed, but didn't have a choice other than moving back home and starting from scratch, so I agreed to it. I disliked Richard instantly, especially after coworkers told me he was flaunting his management perks, which consisted of large allowances for housing and automobiles paid for by sales production from employees like myself. "Did you know Richard's related to a serving member of the board of directors back in Europe?" my colleague Sarah whispered to me one day. "That's how he got the job as a regional manager. It turned out everyone knew he didn't have the skills to do our job. He just collected fat checks, went to expensive restaurants with friends, and billed it to the company as client development, all while leasing a new Tesla every 2 years on the company's dime and generally being a jerk to everyone who worked for him." During my first week, I also met my junior associate, Ryan. We sat down to discuss some accounts that I'd inherited in backwater locations none of the other directors wanted to visit. Ryan was professional, but I got the distinct impression he hated me, though I didn't know why. I started traveling around to meet my clients and prospects over the next few weeks, usually spending at least 3 or 4 days on the road, back in the office on Fridays to go over follow-ups on business leads with Ryan and execute whatever paperwork needed to be taken care of. About a month later, I returned from one of my trips to find Ryan's desk empty. Sarah caught me up on the office gossip. "Ryan quit," she explained. "Turns out he was mad that he'd been passed over for the position you got. I couldn't fault him. I probably would have done the same thing." I approached Richard about hiring someone to replace Ryan. "Richard, we need to get someone in to back me up. It's going to be hard to grow the business without support." Richard waved his hand dismissively. "Your client portfolio is just starting out. You can handle both roles until it makes sense to staff up." I tried to argue my point, but Richard wasn't having it. "Alex, you'll manage. Now, if there's nothing else..." I spent the rest of the year working my ass off. This was right before cloud-based systems were common, so executing business on the road was hard. Even though laptops were reserved for directors, Richard grudgingly let me use a company laptop. I would handle all the paperwork to process client business from hotel business centers late at night or early in the morning, living on 5 hours of sleep or catching naps on planes whenever I could. After dealing with problems from some irate clients, I eventually paid for my own personal smartphone. I gave my personal number to clients so I could handle problems from the road. I landed a few big clients by a combination of luck and hard work, and got some solid referrals, which led to more referrals. Within a few months, I was gaining some serious momentum. Since I didn't have an associate to help me, I spent weekends and late nights back at the office handling paperwork, then back on the road during the week. I was so busy working both sides of the job that by December, I hadn't taken my mandatory 2 weeks of vacation. I had some new clients that needed to be handled by year-end, so I was granted a vacation waiver, meaning that my 7 weeks of vacation would roll over into the next year, adding up to 12 weeks of vacation plus sick time for the coming year. I wasn't upset about working through year-end, though I flew back and forth to California for Christmas on a 24-hour turnaround. I rationalized it, hoping that I would get paid the first big bonus of my career in a few months. I continued to work at my frenetic pace through April, taking no vacation as I was bringing in more and more clients and digging myself out of paperwork when I wasn't on the road. In the new year, we had some meetings about scorecards and sales goals, and I led my office in some of the categories and was number 1 for overall production. Finally, in mid-April, Richard called me into his office. "Time to discuss your bonus and annual review, Alex," he said, sliding a piece of paper across his desk. I eagerly picked it up, expecting my bonus to be at least equal to my base salary, if not double. As I looked at the number, my heart sank. It was almost 90% less than I was expecting. I laughed out loud, thinking it must be a joke. "Very funny, Richard. Where's the real number?" Richard's face remained impassive. "That is the real number, Alex." "But how? Why?" I sputtered, my mind reeling. Richard leaned back in his chair. "I'm proud of you, Alex, but since you're not a director, this is the maximum bonus I can give you. There isn't any more money in the budget." I sat there in shock, then kept asking the same question in different ways. Basically, why did he screw me on my bonus? Despite pointing to the scorecard that showed me as the best producer in the office, all while having no junior associate, Richard wasn't budging. "What about my promotion to director?" I asked, grasping at straws. "I've clearly demonstrated I can produce." Richard shook his head. "Maybe next year if you prove this year wasn't a fluke." It was a gut punch. Richard then had the audacity to tell me that while my review was positive, I had some flaws I needed to work on, mainly that I didn't work very well in a team atmosphere. "Richard," I said, my voice tight with anger, "I'm a team of one. There isn't anybody on my team to complain about me." A switch finally flipped in my brain as I realized I'd just gotten majorly screwed and there was no changing the outcome. I stood up abruptly. "I'm not feeling well," I said. "I'll be taking some sick days." I walked out of his office, feeling like I was in a daze. I forwarded my incoming calls to Richard's extension, packed up my important papers in case I decided never to come back, then headed to my apartment in a complete rage. After drinking myself senseless for 48 hours and forwarding all my calls to voicemail, I called Richard the following Monday. "I'm taking a vacation week," I told him bluntly. "What? You can't just—" Richard started to protest, but I had already hung up. I flew home and started looking for job leads. Out of options, I went back to my job the following week. First day back, I looked at my HR data and realized that I still had 11 weeks of vacation to use that year, plus a few more weeks of sick leave. Around that time, there was a company-wide video conference to celebrate a big company milestone. To mark the occasion, we were told we would be getting an extra week of vacation that year, meaning once again I had 3 months of vacation in my account. The next month was a blur of planning vacations. I had accrued a lot of hotel, rental car, and airline points during the past year of traveling, so I spent my days in the office doing as little client work as I could get away with while planning how to use my vacation time and points. By the end of May, I submitted my vacation requests, detailing how I was going to take 3 months of vacation in the 7 remaining months of the year. Within a day, Richard called me into his office. "Alex, this vacation schedule is unacceptable," he said, waving the paper at me. "There's nobody to cover your clients in your absence." I stood my ground. "I'd like to have HR present for this discussion, Richard." Richard objected, but I insisted. When the HR rep Tom joined us, Richard explained the situation. Tom shook his head. "I'm sorry, Richard, but Alex is legally entitled to take these vacation days. You can't reject the request." I then dropped another bombshell. "Also, Richard, I won't be handling any customer calls from my personal phone when I'm out of the office. I'll be forwarding my work phone to yours when I'm on vacation or doing business development trips." Richard's face turned red with anger, but he knew he couldn't do anything about it unless he promoted me to director and issued me a company phone. After that, I only did business development in areas where I like to travel and vacation. Trips to Miami became common. If I was traveling, I would typically spend Monday to Wednesday making very infrequent sales calls, then take off Thursday and Friday with vacation days. Richard was now irate with all of the customer calls coming to him, but he still refused to hire an assistant for me. Whenever I was back in the office, which was pretty infrequent at this point, he would routinely lambast me with verbal warnings about poor performance. "You're really disappointing me, Alex," he would say. I would just shrug my shoulders and reply, "Maybe you were right not to promote me to director, Richard. I'm clearly not cut out for it." By October, I started to firm up some conversations with a prospective employer back in California and finally received a concrete job offer in mid-November. I waited until December 15th to inform Richard that I was quitting. I walked into his office and dropped the resignation letter on his desk. "What's this?" he asked, picking up the paper. "My resignation," I said. "Effective immediately. I'll be using my 2 remaining weeks of vacation and sick leave." Richard's face fell. But what about your clients? Can't you stay through January to train a replacement?" I laughed. "Ryan quit almost 2 years ago, Richard. You've had plenty of time to prepare for this." As I was packing up my office, Tom from HR knocked on my door to conduct an exit interview. I aired out all of my dirty laundry, telling him how Richard had screwed me on my bonus. Tom shook his head. "You know, since Ryan had been an employee at the beginning of the year you arrived, his salary and bonus were actually in the budget for the whole year. Richard could have allocated that amount to your bonus." I moved back to California that week and started my new job in January. 3 months later, I got a call from Sarah. "You won't believe what happened," she said excitedly. "HR from New York came down to interview everyone. Turns out your sudden departure raised some eyebrows. They saw you as a rising star. After hearing all the complaints about Richard, they reassigned him to some backwater town in the middle of nowhere. No fancy restaurants or new Teslas for him anymore. I started my own company 5 years ago, and it's worked out pretty well. Even though I got screwed over a decade ago, I always think about that experience fondly. It showed me how companies and bosses will generally screw you over if given half a chance, which put me on the path to starting my own firm. I'm forever grateful for that eye-opening experience, and I always think about it around New Year's to remind myself how far I've come and how not to treat my employees. Hopefully some of you can benefit from my experience without all of the drama I went through. Happy New Year! The next one is an entitled people's story. I've lived in my house for over 20 years now. It's a nice place in a quiet suburb with a big backyard that's always been my pride and joy. The crown jewel was this massive oak tree. Must have been at least 100 years old. I loved that tree. It provided shade, it was home to all sorts of wildlife, and it just looked majestic. A few years back, this new family moved in next door. At first they seemed nice enough. We'd wave and exchange pleasantries, typical neighbor stuff, but then the wife, let's call her Karen, started getting involved with the local homeowner association. Now, I'm not a member of the homeowner association, never saw the point, to be honest. But Karen, she threw herself into it with a passion I've never seen before. It wasn't long before she started making suggestions about my property. First, it was my fence, then my mailbox. I politely reminded her each time that I wasn't part of the homeowner association, so their rules didn't apply to me. She'd huff and puff, but eventually back down. But then she set her sights on my oak tree. "That tree is a hazard," she told me one day, hands on her hips. "It's too close to the property line. What if it falls?" I tried to explain that the tree had been there for decades without issue. I even showed her the results of an arborist's inspection I'd had done recently, which declared the tree healthy and stable. But Karen wasn't having it. "Well, I'm going to bring this up at the next homeowner association meeting," she declared. "We'll see what they have to say about it." I reminded her again that I wasn't part of the homeowner association. She just rolled her eyes and stormed off. A week later, I came home from work to find a crew in my backyard, chainsaws at the ready, about to take down my oak. Karen was there, looking smug. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded. "The homeowner association voted," Karen said, waving a piece of paper at me. "This tree is coming down." I snatched the paper from her. It was some sort of official-looking document, but I knew it was bull. I told the crew to leave immediately, which they did, looking confused. Karen was livid. "You can't do this!" she screeched. "The homeowner association has spoken!" "Karen," I said, trying to keep my cool, "for the last time, I am not part of your homeowner association. You have no authority here. Now get off my property before I call the police." She left, but not before promising this wasn't over. The next day, I called a lawyer. He confirmed what I already knew. The homeowner association had no right to touch my property. He helped me draft a cease and desist letter, which I hand-delivered to Karen and the homeowner association president. Things quieted down for a bit after that. Karen would glare at me whenever we crossed paths, but she kept her distance. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. About a month later, I woke up to the sound of a chainsaw. I ran outside in my pajamas to find Karen, in the middle of the night, trying to cut down my oak tree herself. Karen! I yelled. What the hell are you doing? She whirled around, chainsaw still running. This tree is coming down one way or another, she shouted back. I called the police immediately. They arrived quickly and found Karen still hacking away at my tree. They arrested her for trespassing and vandalism. The next day, I had an arborist come out to assess the damage. It was bad. Karen had managed to cut through about a third of the trunk before she was stopped. The arborist said the tree was now unstable and would have to come down. I was devastated. This tree had been here longer than I had, and now it was going to be lost because of one entitled neighbor. The arborist estimated the value of the tree at around $150,000, based on its size, age, and species. I filed a police report and contacted my lawyer again. He advised me to sue Karen for the value of the tree. We filed the lawsuit the next week. Karen, of course, countersued. She claimed the tree was a hazard and that she was acting in the interest of neighborhood safety. My lawyer said her case had no merit, but we'd have to go through the process anyway. As the legal battle dragged on, the damaged oak tree became more and more unstable. City officials got involved and said it needed to come down immediately for safety reasons. I had no choice but to comply. The day the tree removal crew came was one of the saddest of my life. I watched as they methodically dismantled this beautiful ancient tree. It took them most of the day. Just as they were finishing up, I heard a loud crash, followed by a shrill scream. I ran out front to see what happened. There, in Karen's driveway, was her brand new Mercedes, or what was left of it. One of the larger branches from my oak had fallen right on top of it, crushing the roof and shattering all the windows. Karen was beside herself, alternating between screaming at the tree removal crew and at me. "Look what you've done!" she shrieked. "You'll pay for this!" And true to her word, she filed another lawsuit against me for the damage to her car. When we finally got to court, the judge was not amused by Karen's antics. He dismissed her countersuit about the tree being a hazard, pointing out that she had no authority to make that determination, especially on property that wasn't hers. Then came the matter of her destroying my tree. The judge was shocked when he heard the estimated value. "Mrs. Karen," he said, "do you realize the seriousness of your actions? You destroyed property valued at $150,000. That's a felony." Karen tried to argue that the tree couldn't possibly be worth that much, but the judge wasn't having it. He ordered her to pay me the full $150,000 for the tree, plus additional damages for the stress and legal fees. Finally, we got to Karen's lawsuit about her car. The judge actually laughed out loud when he heard this one. "Let me get this straight," he said. "You illegally cut down your neighbor's tree, which made it unstable. Then, when it was being removed because of the damage you caused, a branch fell on your car. And you think Mr. OP is responsible for this?" Karen nodded emphatically. The judge shook his head. "Mrs. Karen, the only person responsible for the damage to your car is you. Case dismissed." I left the courthouse that day feeling vindicated but still sad. No amount of money could replace that beautiful old oak tree, but at least justice had been served. Karen and her family moved out a few months later. I heard through the grapevine that the homeowner association had kicked her out of her position after all this came to light. As for me, I used some of the money from the lawsuit to plant a new oak tree in my backyard. It's just a sapling now, but maybe in 100 years or so, it'll be as magnificent as the old one was, and hopefully it'll have better luck with the neighbors. The next one is a petty revenge story. My last girlfriend a few years ago was not computer smart. She had me show her how to use iTunes and upload songs that she wanted onto her iPhone. I have an extensive music library, so I took the time to copy the entire thing to her computer, and then asked her what songs she wanted. 23 out of thousands of songs, she only wanted to listen to 23 songs. Okay, fine. Red flag number 1, but a very soft red flag. People are free to listen to what they want. This was after a few months of the relationship. Another few months later, and I see her being shady and hide her phone, so I take a look. She's having an emotional affair with an ex that she swore she never ever interacted with. Okay, technically she said she never spoke with, but if you want to split that hair, then you can stop reading now. So at this point, I'm out. We ain't living together, and the relationship is less than 9 months old. I'll live, even though it hurts. So I stay the night for one last hurrah, and once we've done the deed and she's fallen asleep, I sneak down to her home office and log onto her computer. I first delete 100% of the music I copied except for one song. It's a rarely known song by an artist named Rick Astley. You probably have never heard of it. I then copied the song 22 times and renamed each copy, plus the original to one of the songs on her tiny playlist. Hey ya, how about Hey Rick? And Betty, when you call me, you can call me Rick. Wheel in the Sky keeps on Rick rolling. You get the idea. No matter what song she chose, she got my boy Ricky. Then I synced it with her iTunes and her phone. I left in the morning and never spoke with her again, but I sometimes wonder how long it took her to unduck her song list, considering she no longer had the MP3S. Maybe her ex helped her figure it out? Who cares? I drove off into the sunrise feeling melancholic but satisfied. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.